The air conditioning in the office always has this low, mournful hum, especially on a Tuesday afternoon when everyone's pretending to look busy, but really just counting the minutes until 5. That was the setting for the creepiest interaction of my entire adult life. I was scrolling through some budget spreadsheet, the kind of work that melts your brain, when the new temp, Chloe, glided up to my desk. She'd been with us maybe 3 days. And I mean glided. She was one of those people who moved with an unnecessary amount of grace, like she was perpetually filming a slow-motion perfume ad. She had these huge, kind eyes and a smile that was just a bit too bright, like she was practicing for a toothpaste commercial. Everyone in the office loved her instantly. She brought homemade sourdough bread on her first day. Sourdough, for crying out loud. Who does that? But to me, she felt intense, like a laser pointer aimed directly at my soul. "Hey, Alex," she said, her voice a low, friendly alto. She leaned in just slightly, resting a hand on the corner of my desk. "Mind if I borrow this stapler? Mine seems to have run off." "Sure, go for it," I mumbled, handing it over without looking up. I was trying to hit a deadline, and frankly, I just wanted to be left alone. She didn't take it immediately. She just stared at me, still with that dazzling, high-wattage smile. The silence stretched out, thick and weird. I finally looked up. "Everything okay?" I asked. She just chuckled, a light, airy sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh yeah. Just thinking about how much better this office is now that Gary isn't around." Now, that's where the first tiny alarm bell went off. Gary was the guy who sat at this exact desk before me. He was kind of a legend, a brilliant coder, but a total pain in the butt, and he'd left almost 8 months ago. He was long gone before Chloe had even been hired. Most people who started now didn't even know his name. But I figured, okay, maybe she looked at an old seating chart. Maybe someone mentioned him in passing. It was a little odd, but not a full-blown red flag yet. Yeah, Gary was a character, I agreed, trying to end the conversation. She tapped the stapler thoughtfully, but still didn't pick it up. A character. That's one way to put it. You know, I heard he used to keep a jar of those disgusting pickle-flavored jelly beans right here, under his monitor. She tapped the exact spot where a coaster now sat. My blood went instantly cold. I felt a buzzing start in my ears. The pickle-flavored jelly beans. No one knew about that, no one. It was an inside joke between me and Gary, something we'd laughed about one miserable afternoon when we'd been stuck working until midnight. He'd brought them in as a dare, and we'd had to sign an NDA just to get HR to let us keep the noxious things in the office. When Gary left, I'd found the nearly full jar hidden in the back of a drawer, and I'd thrown it out myself. I hadn't told anyone. Not my boss, not my closest coworker, Brenda. It was such a small, pointless, deeply weird piece of office trivia. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly wide awake. My heart started doing this fast, irregular thump. "How did you know about the jelly beans?" I asked, my voice low and a little shaky. Her smile never wavered. In fact, it seemed to widen by a fraction. It didn't look friendly anymore. It looked like a dare. "Oh, Alex," she purred, finally picking up the stapler. She gave it a little playful shake. "Let's just say I know a lot of little things. About a lot of people." She winked, a quick, practiced, unsettling flash, and then walked off, leaving me sitting there, staring at the empty space where she'd been. The office hum suddenly sounded less mournful and more menacing. It was one thing to be a little too friendly. It was another thing entirely to possess random, obsolete secret knowledge about my immediate physical workspace. It felt like she hadn't just learned a fact. It felt like she'd been studying me, or rather, studying the ghost of the guy whose desk I now occupied. And if she knew about Gary's desk secrets, what did she know about mine? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Gary had posted a stupid photo on Instagram with the jelly beans in the background. Maybe he told a friend who told a friend who told Chloe, but it was pickle-flavored jelly beans. That's a detail your brain is supposed to reject immediately, not remember and recite verbatim to a stranger. It was a completely useless, deeply unsettling piece of information, and she delivered it with the casual air of someone commenting on the weather. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog, typing emails with my eyes glued to the back of Chloe's head, where she sat 5 rows over, diligently and silently, doing whatever temp work she'd been assigned. Every time she moved, I flinched. The idea that she knew things about a lot of people didn't make me feel better. It made me feel like I was a tiny cog in a very large, creepy machine that she was running. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and paranoid, and all she'd done was mention a stapler and some awful candy. This wasn't just a friendly new temp. This was a walking, talking, smiling Wikipedia page of my office's darkest, most pointless secrets. And I needed to know what she wanted. It was the moment I realized the rest of my week, and possibly the rest of my life, was not going to be boring. This was a mystery, and I was unfortunately the main character. If you're watching this, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are and what time it is while you're listening to this crazy story unfold. I need to know someone else is experiencing this weirdness with me. I should probably back up a little and give you the lay of the land. Because context is everything when you're being stalked by a temp who knows too much about disgusting confectionery. My name's Alex. I'm 26, I work in digital marketing, and my life is, by all accounts, intensely average. I live in a tiny apartment, I have a cat named Miso who judges my life choices, and my most exciting recent purchase was a high-quality bath mat. I'm the kind of person who blends in, who prefers a Tuesday night on the couch to a Friday night out. In a modern office setting, I'm just another guy in a gray sweater. And that's exactly how I like it. Our office itself is pretty standard. Glass walls, open concept, the kind of place where you can hear someone chewing chips 3 zip codes away. It's a busy, fast-paced environment, and turnover is high, so temp employees come and go like the tide. We usually get a new one every few weeks to help with data entry or some other low-level grunt work. And that's how Chloe arrived. Our team is small, thankfully. There's me, Alex. Then there's Brenda, my closest work friend, who's in her late 40s, has a dry wit that could cut glass, and is the undisputed office queen of the passive-aggressive email. She's the one who really runs the department. And then there's Mr. Henderson, my boss. Henderson is a nice guy in a I'm trying to look like a visionary while mostly just delegating sort of way. He's earnest, a little clueless about the actual work, but he signs the paychecks, so we tolerate his motivational cliches. When Chloe was introduced on Monday morning, Henderson made a big fuss. He called us all into the little kitchenette holding a cup of bad coffee like it was the Holy Grail. "Team," he boomed, with that annoying, forced enthusiasm, "I want you all to meet Chloe. She's joining us for a few weeks to help us streamline some of that Q3 data analysis. She comes highly recommended and is already proving to be a real go-getter." He actually used the phrase, go-getter. Brenda rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might detach a retina. Chloe just stood there, radiating this manic, almost unsettling positivity. She was polite, professional, and yes, she brought the sourdough bread. She spent the entire first day smiling, nodding, and absorbing information like a human sponge. I actually remember telling Brenda, she's almost too perfect. I think she might be a robot. Brenda just grunted and told me to get back to my spreadsheets. The thing is, Chloe integrated immediately, like a virus with a great personality. She remembered everyone's coffee order on day 2. She knew Brenda's very specific disdain for the lukewarm water in the dispenser. She even managed to get Henderson to stop saying, "Let's circle back" for a whole hour, which is a miracle only the Dalai Lama could usually achieve. Everyone genuinely liked her. She was a breath of fresh air, a highly competent, slightly saccharine breath of air. I was the only one who felt that prickle of unnaturalness. Maybe it's just my natural cynicism, but I found her perfection creepy. She was too much too soon. She asked me a ton of professional questions, stuff about our server structure, our client database, how we organized our archive files, all normal things a temp would need to know, but she asked them with this intense, focused energy, like she wasn't just learning the job, but mapping the entire network of our department. I remember one conversation with her on Tuesday morning, just before the pickle-flavored jelly bean incident. I was standing by the coffee machine trying to navigate the complex ritual of getting the machine to dispense more than 3 drops of caffeine. "Having trouble with that old relic, Alex?" she asked, appearing behind me silently, of course. "Yeah, this thing hates me," I sighed. "It's basically a monument to bad engineering." She reached out and lightly tapped a sequence of 3 buttons that I'd never even noticed before. The machine sputtered to life and delivered a perfect steaming cup. "Try that," she said. "It's the preheat and declog sequence. It bypasses the air bubble in the line. Old maintenance trick. You probably don't remember it, but I bet whoever had your job a few years ago did. They probably got so annoyed they found the secret code. Again, the weird, almost proprietary knowledge. It was like she had access to the building's institutional memory, including the undocumented, low-stakes grudges of past employees. It wasn't just about Gary. It was about the office itself. And I didn't like it. I didn't like being seen, being known, in a place where I was meant to be safely anonymous. After the jelly bean comment, I watched her from my desk. She was typing away, looking completely innocent. But every now and then, she'd glance up and her eyes would flick toward me, and that wide, bright smile would flash. It wasn't a seductive look. It was a knowing look. A look that said, I have the next clue, and I'm just waiting for you to find it. I started feeling like a mouse in a maze designed by a very meticulous, unnervingly cheerful cat. My average, boring life suddenly had a hidden camera, and the director was sitting 5 rows over, giggling. It was exhausting, and the only thing keeping me from running to Henderson and screaming was the fear of sounding completely insane. Mr. Henderson, I think the temp is a spy because she knew about Gary's gross jelly beans. Yeah, that wouldn't end well for me. I had to wait for something more concrete. I had to wait for the next shoe to drop. I tried to push the jelly bean thing out of my mind on Wednesday, truly I did. I told myself it was a fluke, a coincidence, a weird alignment of office gossip. I even spent my lunch break searching our company's internal Slack channels for any mention of pickled jelly beans from 8 months ago, convincing myself I'd just forgotten a public conversation. Nothing. 0 hits. The mystery remained a dead end, sealed in the vault of my private paranoia, but the universe, or maybe just Chloe, wasn't done with me yet. The second, much more significant alarm bell went off around 4 p.m. that day. I was talking to Brenda about an upcoming presentation, showing her some slides on my monitor. Chloe walked past our cubicle on her way to the printer. Ugh, this old presentation software is such a pain, Brenda muttered, leaning closer to my screen. Remember how much better it was when we were using SlideMaster? Shame we switched. Tell me about it, I replied, but I can't complain. At least it's not as bad as that ancient, terrible software we used for the Peterson account years ago. Powergraph 98 or whatever. That thing gave me nightmares, Chloe paused. She didn't stop walking, but her pace slowed to a near halt as she passed. She didn't look at us, but she did tilt her head. Just the slightest movement, like she was tuning into a frequency only she could hear. Then, from the general direction of the printer, I heard her voice loud enough to be casual, but sharp enough to cut through the office chatter. Oh, you mean Spike? She asked, not to me or Brenda, but seemingly to the paper she was pulling out of the tray. The one with the tiny little scar right above his left eye? Brenda and I froze. We looked at each other, and her face, usually a mask of professional boredom, was pure, unadulterated confusion. Who was she talking about? Brenda whispered. I felt like I was going to throw up. I couldn't breathe. I was staring at a blank space on my desk, my mind racing backward, years and years. Spike. Spike was my childhood pet. A turtle. Not just any turtle, but a tiny, angry, 3-inch-long box turtle I had for about 6 months when I was 9. He was a terrible pet. He hated being touched. And he had escaped my backyard and disappeared without a trace after a massive thunderstorm. And the name. Spike. But that was the less weird part. The tiny little scar right above his left eye. That detail. That was the detail that broke my reality. When I was 9, I had accidentally dropped a tiny plastic castle turret into Spike's terrarium, and it had chipped the corner of his shell just above his left eye, leaving a minuscule, barely visible notch. I'd cried for hours, convinced I'd ruined him. My parents had told me it was fine, that only I would ever notice it. And it was true. I had never, not once, told anyone in my entire adult life about that scar. Not a girlfriend, not a college roommate, and certainly not a coworker. It was a secret tucked away in a dusty, pointless corner of my childhood memory, a scar on a turtle that was gone 15 years ago. I stood up, my chair scraping back loudly, causing several heads to turn. Brenda grabbed my arm. Alex, what's wrong? She hissed. I ignored her. I walked straight toward Chloe. She was now standing by the shredder, feeding it a stack of papers with the slow, almost ceremonial calmness of someone completely unbothered. Chloe, I said, my voice barely a strained whisper. She looked up at me, that bright, expectant smile back in place. Yes, Alex? Did you need help with the binding machine? It can be tricky. I leaned in, my hands flat on the top of the shredder unit. How did you know the name of my pet turtle? And how did you know about the scar? Her eyes fluttered for a second, a fleeting mask of confusion, but then the mask snapped back on. She tilted her head, giving me the kind of look you give a child who's asking a ridiculously silly question. Your pet turtle? Alex, I haven't the slightest idea what you're talking about, she said, her voice light and entirely reasonable. I was referring to my cousin's cat, Spike. We think he got into a fight with a raccoon last week. Poor thing has a little scar. I was just talking to myself. It was the perfect lie. A smooth, completely deniable, casually delivered evasion. But I knew better. The timing was too precise. The detail was too accurate. She hadn't heard me and Brenda talking about Powergraph 98. She was listening for my voice, my cues, waiting for an opportunity to drop the next highly personalized bomb. She was tailoring her accidental comment to fit the conversation I was having. I stared at her, trying to find a flicker of doubt, a hint of malice. Nothing. She looked genuinely concerned for her imaginary cat. A cousin's cat, I repeated, feeling the blood drain from my face. Yes. You know how it is with family pets, she said gently. She reached out and patted my arm. Her hand was warm. Now, are you okay? You look a little pale. Maybe you need some more of that preheat and declog coffee. She walked away, this time with a normal, professional gait, leaving me standing next to the shredder, which was quietly masticating documents. I felt violated. This wasn't just office gossip. This was digital-level stalking translated into the real world. This was a deep, invasive knowledge that only someone with access to my childhood records or a bizarre level of obsession could possibly possess. I slowly walked back to my desk. Brenda was staring at me. Okay, Alex, she said quietly. You need to tell me what that was about, because that was the weirdest interaction I've witnessed since Henderson tried to lead a conga line at the Christmas party. That wasn't a cat, Brenda, I said, sinking into my chair. That was my turtle, and she knew a secret about him I've never told anyone. I looked at the stapler she had used the day before. It felt like a piece of evidence. The game was escalating and I was falling behind. I was now absolutely certain. Chloe was not here to process Q3 data. She was here for me. The turtle incident, the Spike reference, didn't just rattle me. It launched me into full-blown panic and research mode. I went home that night and spent 3 hours scrolling through my childhood Facebook pictures, my parents' old digital photo albums, even my terrible old MySpace account, just to see if I had ever posted a picture of Spike, the chipped shell, or mentioned his name. Nothing. Zero. The only place that information existed was in my brain, and apparently in Chloe's on Thursday morning. I walked into the office tense, running on 3 hours of sleep and pure cold anxiety. I was avoiding Chloe, but she seemed to be everywhere. I'd turn a corner and she'd be there, smiling, holding a folder, always just on the periphery, watching. My next run-in was a disaster, a masterclass in how to completely lose your cool in front of a psycho temp. I was in the server room, which is less server room and more a closet with a lot of blinking lights and a faint smell of ozone. I was troubleshooting an issue with a client's old archived files. My phone was propped up on a metal shelf, displaying a map of a neighborhood I used to live in. I had been trying to find a good route to avoid construction traffic for a meeting I had later that day. I was struggling to pull a specific cable when Chloe walked in, carrying a box of toner cartridges. Oh, sorry, Alex, she chirped. Just dropping these off. Henderson wants a complete stock inventory. She set the box down with a little thump on the floor. I straightened up, trying to look annoyed and busy, which wasn't hard because I genuinely was annoyed and busy. No problem, I said stiffly. She glanced at my phone screen, which was displaying a bird's eye view of a very specific, very boring intersection. She didn't even need to lean in. Her eyes just scanned it, and then she tilted her head again. 7:14. Elmwood Drive, she murmured, her voice thoughtful. You still need to be quick on that turnoff of Elmwood onto Cedar. That light is still painfully short. Especially if you're trying to make it before 7:30 a.m. I froze, cable half pulled from the wall. My skin felt clammy. I slowly turned my head from the phone to her. Elmwood Drive. That wasn't the intersection on the map. That wasn't even the city I was looking at for the meeting. Elmwood Drive was the address of the apartment complex I had lived in with my college roommate Mark 5 years ago. It was my address for 2 years during my early 20s. I hadn't thought about that address in years. There was no reason for it to be on my phone, no reason for it to be near the intersection on the map, and absolutely no reason for Chloe to know it, let alone remember the weird, specific traffic pattern. I felt the blood pound in my neck. Chloe, I said, my voice rising in pitch despite my efforts to keep it even. What are you doing? She frowned, looking genuinely confused this time. Doing? I'm delivering toner, Alex. Is there a problem? The address, I hissed, taking a step toward her. 714 Elmwood Drive. How do you know that address? She looked at the phone, then back at me. Well, I don't know, Alex. It's a very common street name. Maybe I knew someone who lived on Elmwood? No, not maybe. That address. That was my address 5 years ago, and you just rattled it off like it was your phone number. She let out a little exaggerated sigh, like I was the most frustrating person on earth. Alex, I don't understand why you're getting so worked up about this. Honestly, maybe you mentioned it in passing to Brenda? She's known you for years, right? I'm sure she's mentioned little things about you. No, I insisted, shaking my head violently. No one at work knows that address. It's an old address. And what did you say about the traffic? The light is short if I'm trying to make it before 7:30 a.m. That was exactly what Mark and I used to joke about. We'd race to get out of the complex before 7:30 because the light would instantly turn red for 3 minutes. How could you possibly know a hyper-specific 5-year-old traffic complaint about my old apartment complex? The server room was small and my voice echoed off the metal racks. I was basically shouting. My frustration had completely overridden my paranoia. Chloe's bright smile finally faded, replaced by something that was much colder, much more calculated. Her eyes went flat. She crossed her arms. You really want to know? She asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I nodded, gripping the edge of the server rack so hard my knuckles were white. She leaned in, and I held my breath, bracing myself for a confession of stalking or a deeply disturbing psychological breakdown. She was finally going to give me a reason. Fine, she murmured, her gaze locking onto mine. I know it because I looked it up on the state property records database. You bought your first car from the guy who lives across the street from there, and your name and address are still listed on the old bill of sale. It was public record. And the short light? Your old roommate Mark posted a 1-star review on Google Maps for that intersection 4 years ago, complaining about the 7:30 a.m. rule. I just Googled the address out of curiosity when I heard you mention a nearby street. It was all public, Alex. You're the one making it weird. She stood up straight, gave me a look of pitying disdain, and walked out of the server room. I stood there, surrounded by the blinking lights, feeling like the biggest, most pathetic idiot in the world. She'd weaponized public information. The turtle thing was still inexplicable, but the address and the traffic complaint? She had an answer. A perfectly plausible, modern-day, digital-age answer. She made me sound like a delusional conspiracy theorist. I slowly pulled out my phone. I searched 714 Elmwood Drive Google Maps. Sure enough, 4 years ago, Mark had left a long, ranting, 5-paragraph review about the pre-7:30 a.m. nightmare. My head was spinning. Was she a genius-level cyberstalker, covering her tracks with plausible deniability? Or was she just a hyper-competent nosy temp who had spent 5 minutes on Google, and I was losing my mind? The plausibility of her answer was the scariest part. It forced me to doubt my own conviction. But still, the turtle. The turtle wasn't public record. I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her gaslight me anymore. The next step wasn't about what she knew. It was about who she was. I spent the rest of Thursday in a state of controlled fury. Chloe's public record answer had been a brilliant move. It didn't resolve the mystery, but it successfully shifted the focus from her creepiness to my overreaction. Everyone else in the office would hear about the guy who yelled at the friendly temp over a Google Maps review and immediately side with her. I had to operate in total secrecy. My plan was simple. I needed to verify her employment status. If she was a legitimate temp hired through a legitimate agency, then this was just a bizarre, unsettling situation. If she wasn't on the books, then the whole thing was an orchestrated fraud, and I had grounds for reporting her. The first place to check was the shared network drive, the folder we all used for general office admin. It contained the team roster, the current project list, and, most importantly, the vendor temp contractor log. This was the log where HR would put down the name, agency, start date, and basic contractor ID for any non-payroll employee. I waited until 5 minutes before closing, when Henderson was packing up and Brenda was focused on her daily ritual of forwarding a week's worth of work emails to her home account. Chloe was still at her desk typing away, looking angelic and industrious. I quietly opened the admin folder, clicked on the vendor log, and scrolled down. It was alphabetical. I checked under C for Chloe, nothing. I tried K for maybe Chloe, nothing. I searched the entire document for Chloe. 0 results. Panic flared up again, but I forced myself to be methodical. Maybe she was listed under the temp agency's name. I checked the last 3 agencies we had used. Apex Staffing, Dynamic Solutions, The Office Hand. I checked the names provided by those agencies. A Mark, a Jennifer, and a David. No Chloe. Okay, maybe Henderson had done an independent contract with her, some kind of rogue hire. I checked the personnel onboarding forms folder, the one for new full-time and temporary employees. I scrolled through the forms for the last 6 months. They were all there. My own paperwork from 2 years ago, Brenda's, all the new hires. I searched the entire folder for any file with Chloe in the title or text. Nothing. She wasn't on any official team roster. She wasn't listed under any temp agency. There was no internal record of her having filled out an I-9, an NDA, or even a basic company access form. Chloe, the woman who had been sitting 5 rows from me for the last 4 days, using a company computer, drinking company coffee, and knowing terrifyingly specific details about my childhood turtle and my old address, did not officially exist. I leaned back in my chair, swallowing hard. The hum of the air conditioning sounded incredibly loud. I felt a cold certainty settle over me. She wasn't a stalker. She was an imposter. But why? What was the goal? Identity theft? Corporate espionage? Or was it all just about terrorizing my deeply average life? I quickly printed out the empty vendor temp contractor log. It was a single sheet of paper, a stark white testament to her non-existence. I folded it up and put it in my pocket, evidence that I wasn't crazy. I looked over at Chloe. She was still typing. I had a sudden, terrifying realization. She had to have access to the whole company network to be doing any work. How did she get a network login? How did she get a company badge? If she wasn't on the payroll, someone had to have manually created an account for her. And in our office, that could only be 2 people. Henderson or the IT guy, who was notoriously strict about security. Just as I was about to leave, I saw Chloe stand up. She picked up her bag and walked toward the exit, giving me a final dazzling smile as she passed. It wasn't smug. It was almost expectant. As soon as the door swung shut behind her, I was out of my chair. I needed to see her desk. I crept over to her workstation. It was perfectly neat. A clean mouse pad, a perfectly aligned monitor, a small plant in a tasteful terracotta pot that she must have brought in. I checked the drawers. Empty. Completely sanitized. But then I looked at the PC. It was logged in. I hadn't been expecting that. Temps always lock their computers when they leave. I walked closer. The screen wasn't showing a spreadsheet or an email client. It was displaying a picture. A slightly faded vintage photograph of an office that looked suspiciously like ours, but older, maybe from the late 90s. In the center of the photo was a woman who looked exactly like Brenda, only younger, sitting at a desk and laughing, and on the corner of the screen, a small notepad file was open. It contained 1 line of text. Check the 4th floor archive room. Code is 1730A's. My blood ran cold. The photo, the code, the bizarre specific instruction. It was like she was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for me, not to hide her actions, but to guide me. I quickly logged her computer out, resisting the urge to poke around further. I had the code. I had the clue. And I had the non-existent HR log. The archive room was where we stored all the old physical personnel files and vendor records, the stuff that hadn't been digitized yet. If I was going to find out who hired her and why, that was the place. But I didn't want to do it now, while Brenda was still around. I just had to wait until the morning. I left the office, the printed log burning a hole in my pocket, feeling less like a paranoid fool and more like a detective in a very personal, very terrifying crime drama. I pulled into the office parking lot Friday morning 20 minutes early. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I had the physical evidence in my pocket, the blank space where Chloe's name should have been on, the temp log, and I had the cryptic clue she had left on her desktop. Check the 4th floor archive room. Code is 1738. It felt like she was challenging me, or maybe even helping me. It was the only reason I didn't immediately call Henderson and demand an explanation. I needed to know the whole story before I blew up my career. The 4th floor archive room was a place of legend, not utility. It was where old-timers said the company stored the physical remnants of the past. Old invoices, original incorporation documents, maybe even a few cursed objects. It was kept locked, accessible only by a 4-digit keypad on the steel door. I took the stairs to the 4th floor. It was silent up there, a graveyard of forgotten documents. The air was stale and smelled like old paper and industrial cleaner. I found the archive door at the end of a long, dark corridor. It had the keypad next to it. I pulled the slip of paper with the code out of my pocket, 1738. I punched it in. The light flashed green, and the deadbolt gave a loud, satisfying clunk of release. I pushed the heavy door open. The room was vast, filled floor to ceiling with metal shelving units packed with gray file boxes. It was dimly lit by a single caged bulb. I stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me. My focus immediately went to the area where the personnel files were kept. Our office was a subsidiary, and all the high-level HR data was kept downtown. But our local office kept copies of old terminated employee files and vendor contracts for up to 10 years, just in case. I started pulling the vendor contractor boxes. They were heavy, dusty, and labeled by year. I needed to find a file related to Chloe, or her agency, or maybe even Henderson's authorization for an unofficial hire. I worked quickly, pulling out files, flipping through the contents, and replacing them. Suddenly, I noticed something odd. On the far side of the room, near a utility sink, was a wall-mounted monitor, the kind used for security footage. It was dark, the screen showing the message, "No feed." I walked over and saw a tiny blinking red light next to it. It was a local security camera pointing directly at the archive door in the main hallway. I reached out and touched the monitor. It was still warm. The camera was working, but the feed wasn't displaying. That struck me as strange. Why would a security feed in a locked archive room be active but not displaying? I looked around the room, then back at the door, and then I realized I hadn't seen a single security camera anywhere in the stairwell or in the hallway on the 4th floor. Only this one, pointed at the archive door. I decided to check the footage from my own entry into the building this morning. I knew the security office kept the main feeds. I quickly walked back down to my floor, slipped into the security office. The attendant was out getting coffee, bless his heart, and pulled up the footage from the main lobby and the elevator bank. I went back to 7:40 a.m., the time I walked in. I saw myself clearly, flashing my ID badge, walking past the lobby desk. Everything looked normal. Then I saw Chloe enter the frame. She walked in about a minute after me, smiled and waved at the security guard, and went straight to the elevator. I rewound the feed, watching her entry again. I focused on her badge. It looked like a standard employee badge, but the picture was a little blurry, and I couldn't make out the name. But what I did notice was that she never scanned it. The security gate was already open for her. I rewound again. I had scanned my badge, but the security gate had stayed open a little longer than usual, just long enough for her to slip in right behind me. She tailgated me in. That's how she got in. She didn't have a badge that worked. She just used the brief window created by my own entry. I kept watching. She took the elevator up. I checked the camera feed for my own floor, the 3rd. She didn't get out there. The 5th? Nope. I checked the main hallway camera on the 3rd floor for my entry. Normal. But then I checked the feed. For the main entry point to our department, the one pointed at the glass doors leading into our work area, I watched myself walk in, wave to Brenda, and sit down at my desk. Then, about 3 minutes later, Chloe walked through the glass doors. She smiled at Brenda, waved to a few people, and went to her desk. I rewound that clip, and then I saw it. She walked from the main hallway through the glass doors, but there was a 3-second flicker in the video feed. It was like a tiny digital hiccup. One frame she was entering, the next frame she was 5 feet deeper in the room, walking to her desk. A glitch. I played it back 10 times. The feed was perfectly smooth until the moment she crossed the threshold. Then, flicker. I checked the timestamp. The same anomaly appeared on the lobby camera feed when she entered the building, but the security guard's face was obscuring the door, and it happened again on the elevator bank feed. A 3-second gap in the video, right when she was doing the most critical action. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a digital alteration. Someone was editing the security feed to cover her movements. This was no amateur stalker or clever temp using Google. This was sophisticated, targeted manipulation. She wasn't an employee, she was a ghost, digitally scrubbed from the records and the surveillance. I quickly logged out, heart pounding. My hands were shaking. I had seen enough. The non-existent file, the tailored clues, the evidence of digital tampering, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. She was either a highly trained professional operative or someone inside the company was actively protecting her. And either way, I was in over my head. I had to talk to her. It was time for a face-to-face, no more games confrontation. I didn't wait. I went straight from the security office to Chloe's desk. It was 8:05 a.m. and the office was still mostly empty. Brenda wasn't in yet, and Henderson wouldn't arrive for another hour. It was the perfect time for a private, high-stakes interrogation. She was already there, naturally, typing on her keyboard with that unnerving, quiet competence. She looked up as I approached, her expression instantly shifting from focused to politely welcoming. "Morning, Alex," she said, her smile bright and completely disarming. "Big day for you. That meeting with the client is at 10, right? I printed off the background report you were asking for and left it on your chair. Just a little time saver." She was playing the perfect temp, the perfect helpful colleague. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I leaned over her desk, placing both hands flat on the polished wood. "Stop it. Chloe," I said, my voice low and firm, filled with all the sleep-deprived paranoia and fear I'd been hoarding for the last few days. "The games are over." Her smile actually softened, taking on a look of gentle concern. "Games? Alex, I genuinely don't know what you mean. Are you feeling all right?" "Don't insult my intelligence," I snapped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the printed document from the night before, the one with the empty space under C for her name. I slammed it down on her desk. "You are not on the official temp log. You are not listed under any agency. You have no file in HR. You don't exist on the payroll." Her eyes flicked down to the paper, then back up to mine. There was no fear, no panic, only a faint trace of something that might have been disappointment. "Oh, you checked the log," she said softly, almost to herself. She picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it inside her desk drawer. "Clever of you, Alex. I always knew you were smarter than you let on. And you knew about the turtle." "The scar. You knew the old apartment address and the 7:30 a.m. traffic complaint. And I saw the security footage, Chloe. The glitches. Someone is editing the feed for you. Who are you? Are you a corporate spy? Did Henderson hire you for some illegal data extraction?" I was breathing hard, practically shaking the desk. I was ready for the dramatic breakdown, the sudden confession, the moment of truth. She just stared at me for a long, quiet minute. The only sound was the distant hum of the office and the tap-tap-tap of someone else's keyboard down the hall. Then, she did something completely unexpected. She didn't confess. She didn't panic. She just looked past me at my desk and she started laughing. It wasn't the high-wattage, saccharine laugh. It was a real, genuine, almost tender chuckle. "You're still carrying that around," she said, tilting her head toward my desk. I looked back. There was a simple, small, framed photo of me, my parents, and my little sister from a vacation about 10 years ago. It was slightly faded, just a sentimental piece of office clutter. "What about it?" I demanded. "Look closer, Alex. Look at your dad." I hesitated, then picked up the frame and looked at the picture. My dad was standing next to me, beaming, wearing a ridiculously bright Hawaiian shirt. "What about my dad?" "His watch," she said. "The watch he's wearing." Look at the face, I squinted. It was an old, cheap digital watch, the kind you buy at a drugstore. But on the face, the screen was slightly angled, and I could just make out a faint, tiny scratch on the glass. "The scratch," I murmured. "Not just any scratch," Chloe said, her voice now filled with a genuine, heartfelt warmth that cut through my anger. "That little crescent-shaped scratch, right on the 7 o'clock position, you made that. You were about 16, and he'd just let you borrow it on a trip to the local fishing dock. You dropped your keys, and when you bent down to grab them, the clasp caught the edge of the pier, and the face of the watch scraped against the concrete. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the frame. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I had forgotten that. I remembered dropping the keys. I remembered the scrape. I remembered the fear of telling my dad he'd scratched his watch. He hadn't even noticed until I pointed it out. And then he'd just laughed and said, well, now it has character. I slowly turned back to Chloe. My confrontation, my anger, my whole thesis about her being a spy or a fraud, it all vanished, replaced by a deep, terrifying certainty. This was a knowledge that no public record, no Google search, no casual office gossip could ever yield. This was a detail only I and my family knew. A forgotten, meaningless, completely personal moment. Who are you? I whispered, the words ragged. Chloe's smile was gone entirely now. Her eyes were serious, even a little sad. She reached into her bag and slowly pulled out a manila envelope. I told you I know things, Alex, she said. But I don't know everything. I'm here because I need your help finding something. And to do that, I had to be certain. I had to test your memory. She slid the manila envelope across the desk. This is the last piece of the puzzle you have to solve before you understand everything. But before you open it, let me ask you one last question about the man who hired me. Henderson, I gasped. Yes, Mr. Henderson. If you went to HR and told them you had proof I didn't exist on the payroll, what would they tell you? I remembered the empty log. They'd tell me I was right. That you're a fraud. Chloe shook her head slowly. No, Alex, they'll tell you something entirely different. And that's the real danger. Now go. Check the one place you haven't checked. I didn't open the envelope, not yet. I couldn't. The watch-scratch memory had completely annihilated my carefully constructed mental defenses. It wasn't data mining. It was mind mining. I left Chloe sitting there, serene and confident, and walked straight to Brenda's desk. She had just arrived, still taking off her coat. Brenda, I need you to cover for me for an hour. Say I'm in a client meeting. Don't ask why, just do it. She took one look at my face. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost wearing my dad's scratched watch, and simply nodded. Client meeting. Got it, go. I headed for the elevators but stopped myself. Chloe had said, go. Check the one place you haven't checked. I had checked the internal logs, the security feeds, and my own memories. The last piece of evidence was in the archive room, but I knew that was just another clue. The real immediate target had to be the thing she warned me about, HR. I took the stairs up to the administrative floor. Our HR office was run by a meticulous elderly woman named Ms. Delaney. She was the gatekeeper of all personnel records and generally had the warm, inviting personality of a tax audit. I knocked on her half-open door and walked in. Ms. Delaney, I apologize for bothering you. I have a very quick, very strange question about one of our new temps. Ms. Delaney, without looking up from her stack of papers, adjusted her glasses. Yes, Alex? We haven't had a new one since Chloe, and she's already proving to be far more efficient than the last three combined. A genuine asset. Yes, Chloe, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I pulled the printout of the empty temp log out of my pocket. I was checking our records, and I couldn't find her name anywhere on the payroll. I'm just curious, was she hired on a special non-standard contract? Because she's not on the main roster. I slid the paper across her desk. I expected her to be flustered, to apologize for an oversight, or to point me to a dusty paper file. She didn't do any of those things. She didn't even look at the paper. She just sighed, a deep, tired sound. Oh, Alex, you're asking about that, she said, finally looking up at me, her expression a mix of sympathy and exasperation. I told Mr. Henderson this was going to happen. Happen? What is that? She leaned forward conspiratorially. Mr. Henderson, Alex, he insisted. Insisted on what? He insisted on adding her name to the roster manually after she started. A handwritten addition to the official locked-down digital log. It caused a nightmare with the server. He told it he was trying to fast-track the paperwork. He created the employee ID himself and assigned her to the special project vendor category. My stomach dropped out. Henderson, the boss. The nice clueless guy who signs the checks. He was the one who had circumvented the system. He was the one who had fabricated her employee ID and personally inserted her name into the network. But why? I asked, reeling. Because, Ms. Delaney whispered, looking around as if Henderson himself might materialize from the ventilation system. Chloe isn't a temp, Alex. She's a consultant. A highly paid, extremely confidential consultant. She was hired through a shell company. I don't even know the name. Specifically to assess the risk vulnerabilities in our old, undigitized archive system. She's here to audit our old records. Her contract states she needs to work incognito to get a true picture of internal protocol compliance before she digitizes everything. A risk assessment consultant? I choked out. Yes, and a very expensive one. That's why Mr. Henderson is so protective of her. He went around the board to hire her because he thinks our data security is a joke. He's terrified that our old paper files contain some liability that will sink the company. He lied to everyone and called her a temp to make sure no one treated her differently and to ensure her presence didn't raise flags. He even forbade me from putting her name on the digital roster for the first week until he could manually override the system. My mind raced. The empty log was now explained. The digital glitches in the security feed? Probably part of her contract, a special IT arrangement to ensure her incognito status wasn't compromised by digital surveillance. The vague, high-level questions she'd asked about our data structure, auditing, but the turtle? The watch scratch? My old address? That wasn't risk assessment. That was personal investigation. And that was the lie. Henderson might have hired her for corporate reasons, but Chloe was using that cover for something else entirely. Ms. Delaney, did Mr. Henderson hire her because he knew her personally? I asked. I have no idea, Alex, but the contract came down from him directly. It was a total bypass of protocol, and that is strictly confidential. If you tell anyone I told you this, I will deny it. Now go back to work, and stop bothering the very valuable, very expensive consultant. I left the HR office completely numb. I was right that she wasn't a temp, but I was wrong about the nature of the lie. Henderson wasn't her accomplice in stalking. He was her unwitting cover. He had built the perfect official-sounding cage for her to operate from. She was using a legitimate, high-level corporate contract to gain access to the office, the records, and most importantly, me. I went back down to my desk, the manila envelope still heavy in my hand. It was time to find out her real goal. Back at my desk, I sat down and finally looked at the manila envelope. It was heavy, thicker than I expected, and sealed with a piece of old brown masking tape. It wasn't branded or marked in any way, just a plain, slightly worn envelope that had probably been sitting in her bag for days, waiting for this moment. I ran my finger under the tape and peeled it back, a sudden surge of adrenaline making my hands shake again. I reached inside and pulled out the contents. It wasn't a stack of papers. It was two things: a slightly curled, very old Polaroid photograph, a small square piece of paper, an address label. I looked at the photograph first. It was a terrible quality picture, faded with time and slightly yellowed at the edges. It showed a group of about 10 children, all around 9 or 10 years old, standing in a line in front of a giant, cartoonishly painted wooden sign. They were all wearing matching bright green t-shirts. The kind of t-shirts they give out at cheap local summer camps. I recognized the sign instantly. It was the entrance to Camp Whispering Pines, a day camp I'd gone to for one miserable, hot summer right before 4th grade. I hated it. I was bullied, I was terrible at archery, and I spent most of the time trying to catch the local pond frogs. My heart began to thump a desperate, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked at the children's faces. They were all squinting in the sun, making silly faces. And then I found me. I was on the far left, skinny, with a terrible bowl cut, holding a limp, sad-looking flower. And then I saw her, standing right in the center, next to a tall girl who looked like she was trying to punch the camera, was a small girl with bright, wide eyes and a huge, almost gap-toothed smile. Her hair was pulled back in pigtails, and she was radiating the exact same kind of intense, slightly unnerving energy I now recognized in Chloe. It was her. It was Chloe. She wasn't just a temp, a consultant, or a spy. She was someone from my forgotten past. I put the photo down and picked up the second item, the address label. It was the kind you peel off a bulk mailer, a crisp white square with black block text. It was torn from a larger envelope, and the name and address were still visible. L. Chandler, 152, Hawthorne Lane, Willow Creek, CA 95076I stared at the address. It didn't mean anything to me. I had never lived on Hawthorne Lane. I didn't know anyone named Chandler. I picked up the photo again. I had been at Camp Whispering Pines. What did a girl named L. Chandler have to do with any of this? I flipped the Polaroid over. On the back, written in a child's messy, slanted handwriting, were two phrases. "We'll find it. The box is safe here. Love, L. the box that was safe." I ran the address through my mind again. To Hawthorne Lane. I looked at the picture one more time, focusing on the girl who was Chloe. Suddenly, a connection sparked in my brain, a connection that had nothing to do with the camp photo and everything to do with her other inexplicable knowledge. Elmwood Drive. The address she'd correctly guessed I lived at 5 years. Eagle 152 Hawthorne Lane. The address on the label. I had never lived on Hawthorne Lane, but someone I knew had. I picked up my phone and opened Google Maps. I typed in my old address, 714 Elmwood Drive. Then I typed in 152 Hawthorne Lane. I zoomed out, looking at the distance between them. They weren't in the same city. They weren't even in the same county. But then I switched to satellite view. I looked at Elmwood Drive again, remembering the layout of the old apartment complex. And then I looked at the map for Hawthorne Lane, and I realized it. It wasn't the distance that mattered. It was the design. My old apartment complex, 714 Elmwood, had been built in the early 2000s. It was a very distinct cookie-cutter design. 2 large, rectangular buildings separated by a central courtyard with a small fountain. The building at 152 Hawthorne Lane was an exact replica. A mirrored, identical set of apartment buildings, the same roofline, the same balcony placements, the same central courtyard. It was the same blueprint, just built in a different town by the same developer. Chandler had not lived near me in my 20s. She had lived in a building that was physically identical to mine. A building that was, in all likelihood, the same kind of soulless, cheaply built apartment complex that I had lived in years later. I thought back to the traffic complaint. The 7:30 a.m. light. If the buildings were identical, it was highly likely that the roads, the surrounding infrastructure, the traffic lights, even the local annoyances, were identical too. She hadn't just known my experience, she had lived the parallel experience. But why did she have a picture of us at Camp Whispering Pines? And why the note, "We'll find it," and "The box is safe here"? And who was Elle Chandler? I stared at the picture of the young Chloe, then back at the address. The truth was just a hair's breadth from my grasp. The personal details, the parallel lives, the common childhood memory. I had one last deep dive to take into my own past. I had to remember what happened at Camp Whispering Pines. Camp Whispering Pines. That summer was the low point of my 4th grade life. I was only there for a week, and I spent most of it trying to be invisible. The photo of me with the bowl cut and the dead flower was a perfect summary of my mood. But I had to push past the embarrassment and remember something, anything, of substance. I closed my eyes and forced myself back to that place. The smell of pine needles, the sticky heat, the sound of the counselors yelling instructions. I remembered the other kids, the bullying, the terrible mandatory talent show. And then I remembered Elle. Her name wasn't Elle Chandler then. Her name was Lucy. Lucy was the girl who stood up for me when the older kids tried to steal my lunch money. She was the one who taught me the secret to skipping stones on the pond. She was the only kid who didn't laugh when I cried after Spike, my turtle, disappeared. She was my only friend for that one miserable week, and I remembered the thing. The reason we were at the camp. It was a camp with a very corny, very elaborate end-of-week scavenger hunt. The grand prize was a basket full of candy and a pizza party. Everyone was obsessed with finding the final clue, the lost treasure of the pines. Lucy and I were terrible at the scavenger hunt. We were always last. We got lost in the woods. We failed every riddle, but we decided that if we couldn't win the official treasure, we'd make our own. We spent an entire afternoon creating a time capsule. We called it The Box. We found a rusty old metal lunchbox that someone had left near the canoes. Inside, we put all our most treasured childish possessions, my dead flower, a crumpled drawing of Spike the turtle, a terrible poem Lucy wrote, and a copy of the official Camp Whispering Pines treasure map, which we had covered in little red X marks indicating all the places we didn't find the treasure. We made a pinky swear pact, a blood pact because we were 9 and dramatic. The pact was this: we'll find something better than their treasure. We'll bury the box and we'll come back for it when we're 25, successful, and finally cool. We buried it behind the largest, oldest tree on the property, a giant oak near the back boundary fence. Before we left, Lucy wrote the note. We'll find it. The box is safe here. Love, Elle. And then, the next morning, disaster struck. It wasn't just a regular thunderstorm. It was a torrential flash flood level downpour. I remember the entire camp being evacuated early. My parents picked me up, and in the chaos, I never got a chance to say goodbye to Lucy. We didn't exchange phone numbers or last names. We were just two kids who made a promise, and then the universe stepped in and pulled us apart. I never forgot the box. I forgot Lucy's last name. I forgot the exact location of the tree. But every now and then, usually on a quiet, nostalgic night, I'd remember the promise to come back at 25. I checked the calendar. I was 26 now. I had missed the deadline. I opened my eyes, staring at the photo and the address label. Chloe was Lucy. The pieces exploded into a terrifying, beautiful, and completely coherent whole. The turtle scar. Lucy was there when I made the scratch. She knew Spike's name and the scar, the old address traffic. She lived in a mirrored apartment complex years later, experiencing the same mundane daily annoyances, which in her adult mind became a parallel memory of my experience. She brought up the public record to deliberately confuse me and make me investigate my own life. The camp photo, the box. This was the core. The entire reason she was here. She was the one who had written the note, the one who had made the promise. The consultant ruse. She needed access to the office files, not for corporate espionage, but for a personal reason. She was a professional consultant. That was the only way to get the time, the access, and the non-scrutinized presence she needed. But the most terrifying part? The address label L. Chandler to Hawthorne Lane E remembered the archive room clue she left me. Check the 4th floor archive room. Code is 1738. I hadn't found any files related to her in the archive, but I had only checked the vendor logs. I looked at the label again. It was the address of her parallel apartment. Why would she leave me her address? I finally understood. She wasn't just here to remind me of the promise. She was here because she had found something. Something that led to this office, to this city, to me. The clue wasn't about the box we buried. It was about the box she had found. I realized with a sickening twist that the reason she needed access to the company archives was probably because the box was here. The real, final box, the one that meant something to her, wasn't buried under the oak tree. It was locked up in the physical records of our company. The entire corporate security risk assessment was just a cover to dig up a ghost from her childhood. The final piece of the puzzle, the realization, hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. The clue she had left on the back of the photo, the box is safe here. She wasn't talking about the camp. She was talking about her apartment complex at the time she wrote the note on the back of the photo, the one she had lived in, the one on Hawthorne Lane. It meant that she had retrieved the box a long time ago. But if she had the box, why was she here? What was she looking for? I had to go back to the archive, but this time I needed to look for a different name. Not Chloe, not L. Chandler. I needed to look for a name from Camp Whispering Pines. I grabbed the manila envelope, the Polaroid, and the address label. Everything I needed was right here. I ran back up the stairs to the 4th floor archive room. I entered the code 1738 again, the lock clicking open with the familiarity of a recurring nightmare. I stood in the dusty, quiet room. I wasn't looking for a vendor log anymore. I was looking for a family name. The name of someone who had worked at Camp Whispering Pines, or someone who had lived on Hawthorne Lane who might have also worked for my company. Chloe's real target. I scanned the shelves, ignoring the vendor and personnel labels. I headed straight for the property records and old legal files boxes. I knew Chloe was a consultant, here to assess liability in old documents. But her personal investigation had to be tied to a specific individual or event. I pulled down a box labeled 1998-2003 Property Acquisitions and Leases. I slammed it onto the table and started ripping through the contents. Old invoices, land deeds, and... wait. An old lease agreement for a satellite office in Willow Creek, CA. The city on the address label. I scanned the lease. The office manager listed at the time, S. Chandler. The last name matched. L. Chandler. S. Chandler. S. Chandler was her parent. My company, which I thought was the target, was just the final location. Chloe's parent, S. Chandler, had worked for this company in the early 2000s, right around the time of the camp. I kept reading the file. A document slipped out, an old inter-office memo from 2003. It was a termination letter. S. Chandler had been fired from the company. The reason was vague, but it mentioned a serious breach of protocol regarding the off-site storage of highly sensitive client data. I was getting colder. What did a sensitive client file have to do with the box? I looked around the room, feeling defeated. The mystery was too vast. Lucy had navigated corporate espionage just to find a paper trail that led back to her parents' firing. Then I saw it. Tucked behind the metal shelf, almost invisible, was a small, dusty metal lunchbox. It was slightly rusty, painted a faded, chippy red. My breath hitched. I walked over and gently pulled it out. It was heavy. It was the box. I placed it on the table. It wasn't the box from Camp Whispering Pines. That one was buried under a tree. This one was different, but similar. A rusty, nondescript container. I opened the lid. Inside, there was no dead flower, no turtle drawing. Instead, there was a stack of paper. They weren't legal documents. They were drawings, architectural renderings. They were floor plans and schematics for an apartment complex. I recognized the layout immediately, the two rectangular buildings, the central courtyard with the fountain. It was the blueprint for 7 or 14 Elmwood Drive, my old apartment, and also 152 Hawthorne Lane, Lucy's old apartment. But then I saw the cover sheet. The title was bold and stark: Project Phoenix, Disaster Remediation Plan. I flipped through the pages. The blueprints showed a hidden space in the main wall of the complex's lobby, a secure compartment, and on the last page was a handwritten note, signed S. Chandler, I can't let them destroy this data. It's too important. I hid the hard drive in the last place anyone would look, in the new office safe on Hawthorne Lane. If anything happens, the access code is tied to the only thing I'm certain to never forget: my daughter's birthday. My mind finally snapped the final, terrifying piece into place. S. Chandler, Lucy's parent, was fired for losing sensitive data. That data was hidden on a hard drive in a secret compartment. The secret compartment was located in a physically identical apartment building in a different city, Hawthorne Lane, which was built by the same developer, Project Phoenix. My company had been involved in the development of both the Hawthorne Lane and Elmwood Drive sites, perhaps as a way to quietly hide the Project Phoenix liability. The company wasn't hiding Lucy's box. They were hiding their own secret, a high-value data breach from 20 years ago, and they had built an entire twin building to disguise the hiding spot. The childhood promise was the key to her finding the answer, but the parallel apartment was the key to the company's secret. When Lucy went back to the original Hawthorne Lane address to open the box we buried, she found the architect's Project Phoenix file instead. She then realized the company she was investigating had built a twin building near where I lived, and that I was the missing link. She knew I had lived the same life, just in a different copy of the same building. She didn't come to find a hard drive. She came to find me, the only other person in the world with the intimate, useless knowledge of the sister building. She needed to know if I had ever seen anything out of the ordinary at 714 Elmwood Drive. She was using the memories of a turtle and a scratched watch to verify the trustworthiness of the only person who shared a piece of her family's hidden history. The corporate espionage was real, but it was her espionage. As I closed the metal box, the archive door suddenly opened, and Mr. Henderson walked in. He looked completely pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Alex! What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice thin and shaky. "I just got a call from IT. They said someone was tampering with the security footage, and I need to know. Did you talk to Chloe? Did she say anything?" Henderson was breathing hard, looking less like a clueless boss and more like a man facing a firing squad. He saw the rusty metal lunchbox on the table, and his eyes widened in terror. "The Phoenix box," he whispered, his voice catching. "It's still here. I thought it was destroyed years ago." I finally understood Henderson's role. He wasn't Chloe's partner. He was a terrified employee covering his tracks. "You knew about Project Phoenix," I said, picking up the box. "You knew Chloe was coming to find this. That's why you hired her incognito, to keep the whole thing quiet." "No," he hissed, scrambling to close the archive door. "I didn't hire her. I hired a private investigator to find her." After the board started asking questions about the old Willow Creek property, I found the internal memo about S. Chandler. I realized the secret was still out there. I knew the daughter, Elle, was trying to track down the data to clear her parents' name. I hired a specialist to track her down, find the data, and destroy it before the board found out I missed it during my initial audit. Chloe is the specialist you hired to find Lucy? I asked, confused. No, Alex! The specialist I hired failed. They lost the trail in California. Chloe, Lucy, she walked right into my office 4 days ago, using the consultant cover, and told me exactly what she was here for. She threatened to expose the whole Project Phoenix scandal, the illegal off-book liability, unless I gave her an incognito workspace and access to the archives. She blackmailed me. I was terrified. He ran his hand over his thinning hair. I gave her the access. I created the fake employee ID. I've been covering for her for 4 days, praying she'd find the box and leave me out of it. I looked at the lunchbox, then at Henderson, then at the manila envelope I still held. Chloe hadn't been testing my memories to decide if I was trustworthy. She was testing my memories to see if I had ever mentioned a hidden compartment at 714 Elmwood Drive. She was using a beautiful, forgotten childhood bond as a corporate security litmus test. Did you ever see anything weird at your old apartment, Alex? Henderson pleaded. A spot that was patched up? Anything at all? No, I said, shaking my head. Just a really short traffic light. The ultimate irony. A massive corporate conspiracy hidden behind a facade of identical suburban apartments, and all I remembered was the traffic. Suddenly my phone buzzed. It was a text message. From an unknown number. I have the box. Thank you for the confirmation, Alex. A promise is a promise, even 15 years later. It was always about the partnership. I looked down. The rusty metal lunchbox on the table was empty. Henderson and I both stared at the open container. Where did it go? Henderson stammered. I looked down at the manila envelope in my hand. Inside, I realized I was still holding the Polaroid, the address label, and one last thing. A small flash drive the size of a thumbnail. It must have been slipped in with the other items when she handed me the envelope. She didn't take the box, I said, holding up the drive. She took the data. The box was just a misdirection. The lunchbox on the table wasn't the Phoenix box. It was the archive box, the place where S. Chandler's termination file was stored, confirming the liability. Chloe had manipulated Henderson into believing the physical box was the treasure, while she was actually using the envelope to pass me the real digitized data. The memory test, the turtle, the watch scratch, all of it was a loyalty check. She was trusting me, the only person from her past, to hold the evidence. Henderson sagged against the wall, defeated. She won. The company is ruined. I looked at the flash drive. It was proof of a massive cover-up, capable of destroying a lot of lives, including the careers of people who were just trying to survive in the middle, like me and Brenda. But it also contained the truth that could clear the name of my forgotten childhood friend's parent. She won, Mr. Henderson, I agreed, looking at the drive. But I think she won for the right reasons. I never told Henderson about the flash drive. I never reported Chloe. I deleted the L text message and shredded the printed temp log. Chloe or Lucy vanished. The very next day, a high-profile article broke in an investigative journal detailing the decades-long Project Phoenix cover-up. Our company was in crisis. Henderson was fired. And I was left alone in a suddenly quiet office, staring at a framed picture of my dad's scratched watch. I never heard from her again. But the mystery was gone. My life was average again. Yet, every day when I log onto my computer, I remember the face of the girl from Camp Whispering Pines and the forgotten promise we made. She had achieved her mission, and in the process, she had reminded me that even the most mundane life has a hidden past, and that fate, or a desperate friend, will always find a way to honor an old pinky swear. It leaves a lingering question. Did the universe bring her back to me to clear her parents' name, or was it just so 2 kids could finally say, "We found it," 15 years later? If you enjoyed this story about forgotten promises and corporate secrets, please drop a comment below, like this video, and hit that subscribe button for more long-form viral stories.